Rain pelted Evan's face, sharp and cold, as he stood on the sagging porch of his mother's house, his knuckles hovering over the peeling red door. At 32, he was a shadow of himself. No job, no home, just a torn duffel bag slung over his aching shoulder, the last threads of a life unraveled by illness. Lightning streaked the sky, illuminating the small Iowa town he had fled a decade ago, and now, with nowhere else to turn, he'd come back to the woman who'd birthed him, hoping for a scrap of mercy. He knocked, the sound swallowed by the storm, his heart thudding with a desperate plea. "Just one night, Mom." The door creaked open, and there she was. Linda, older now, her face etched with lines, staring at him like he was a stranger. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice a blade through the rain. Evan had been a teacher once, molding young minds in a classroom filled with crayon drawings and laughter. But chronic arthritis stole that, his hands too stiff to grade papers, his body too frail to stand for hours. No insurance, no savings, he'd lost his apartment, his dignity, everything, until this porch was his last stop. 10 years ago, Linda had cut him off when he came out as gay, her words still ringing in his ears. "You're no son of mine. Get out." He'd left then, 22 and heartbroken, building a life far from her judgment. Now jobless and sick, he'd swallowed his pride, thinking time might have softened her. "I need help, Mom," he said, voice cracking. "I've got nowhere to go." Her eyes narrowed, cold as the rain soaking his jacket. Behind her, the house glowed warm. A new husband, Carl, lounged on a couch, 2 stepkids sprawled with video games, all turning to gawk. "Help?" Linda spat, stepping onto the threshold. "You show up here looking like trash after what you chose to be?" Evan flinched, the old wound splitting open. "I didn't choose it. It's who I am," he said, clutching his bag tighter. Carl snorted from inside, a low, mocking laugh. "We don't take in your kind," he called, and the kids giggled, their eyes glinting with scorn. Linda's face hardened. "I told you 10 years ago, no queers under my roof. Nothing's changed." He tried again, voice small. "Just tonight, please. It's pouring." She didn't blink. "Should have thought of that before you shamed us," she hissed, loud enough for neighbors to hear through the storm. "Get off my porch. You're not welcome here." The door swung shut, the slam a gunshot in his chest, the lock clicking with finality. Evan stood frozen, rain streaming down his face, mixing with tears he couldn't hold back. Carl's laugh echoed through the wood, the kids' whispers a cruel chorus. 10 years ago, she'd thrown his clothes into the yard. Now she'd tossed him out again. A sick, broke man with nothing left to lose. He turned, the storm swallowing him whole, the porch light fading as he stumbled into the dark. Ever been turned away by the ones who should have held you close? Share your story below. We're listening. If Evan's pain hits home, hit like, share this, and subscribe to Heart Stories. His fight's just starting. Stay with us. Evan trudged through the rain-soaked streets of the small Iowa town, his sneakers squishing with every step, the cold biting deeper into his joints than the arthritis ever had. The echo of his mother's door slamming still rang in his ears, her words, "No queers under my roof," slicing through the storm's howl. At 32, he was a wreck. No home, no home, just a soggy duffel bag and a body that betrayed him, his hands too stiff to hold anything but despair. The town blurred past, shuttered shops, flickering streetlights, until he stumbled into a park, its benches slick and empty. He sank onto one, rain pooling around him, his breath puffing in short, shaky bursts, too tired to care if the night swallowed him whole. Hours ticked by, the storm unrelenting, when a figure shuffled toward him, a small woman, hunched under an umbrella, her coat flapping in the wind. She stopped, peering at him through wire-rimmed glasses fogged with mist. "You'll freeze out here, Paul," she said, her voice rough but warm, cutting through the rain's drone. Evan blinked up at her, water streaming down his face, too numb to answer. She tisked, then jerked her head toward a dim light across the street. "Come on, I've got a chair inside." He hesitated, but her stubborn squint left no room for argument. He followed, dragging his bag, each step a battle against the ache in his bones. She led him to a weathered storefront, its sign barely legible, Agnes's Bake Shop. Inside, the air hit him like a hug, warm, thick with the scent of yeast and sugar. Agnes, 70 and wiry, tossed her umbrella aside and pointed to a wooden chair by a counter cluttered with flour sacks. "Sit," she ordered, disappearing into the back. Evan obeyed, shivering as water dripped from his clothes onto the cracked linoleum. She returned with a thick wool blanket, draping it over his shoulders without a word, then handed him a steaming cinnamon roll, its glaze glistening under the dim lights. "Eat," she said. "No one goes hungry under my roof." He stared at it, then at her. Gray hair pulled into a messy bun, hands knotted from years as a nurse, and tears spilled before he could stop them. He took a bite, the warmth spreading through him, the sweetness a shock after days of nothing. "Why?" he croaked, voice raw. Agnes shrugged, wiping her hands on an apron. "Saw you out there looking like a drowned pup. I don't know your story, but I've patched up enough folks to know no one deserves this." Evan swallowed hard, the roll sticking in his throat as he mumbled, "My mom, she kicked me out. Again." Agnes's eyes softened, but she didn't pry, just pulled up a stool and sat across from him. "Folks can be cruel. Doesn't mean you stop living." Her words landed gentle, a balm on a wound he'd carried too long. Morning crept in, the rain easing to a drizzle, and Agnes didn't send him away. "Got a sink full of dishes back there," she said, tossing him a rag. "Help out if you want. No rush to leave." Evan nodded, grateful for the excuse to stay. He scrubbed pots, his stiff hands protesting, while she kneaded dough, humming an old tune. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. He swept floors, hauled flour bags when he could, and she taught him tricks. How to roll dough thin, how to cinnamon dust just right. She lived alone above the shop, no kids, no husband, just a cat named Muffin who napped by the oven. "Lost my Tom years back," she said one night, passing him a muffin. "Never needed more than this place. Till now, maybe." Evan found something in her gruff kindness he hadn't known he needed. She didn't flinch when he told her about being gay, just nodded and said, "Makes no difference to my bread." One evening, as they sat with tea and scones, she patted his hand, her calluses rough against his skin. "You're a good kid, Evan. Stay as long as you like." He looked at her, this stranger who'd given him a chair, a blanket, a roll, and felt a knot loosen in his chest. 10 years of rejection had left him hollow, but Agnes, with her flour-dusted hands and steady gaze, was filling it, not with blood ties, but with something stronger, choice. She wasn't his mother by birth, but she was the first to open a door when the world slammed shut. Evan pressed his palms into a ball of dough, the counter beneath him scarred from decades of use, his fingers finding a rhythm that eased the ache of arthritis creeping through his joints. At 32, he stood in the heart of Agnes's bake shop, the air warm and heavy with the smell of rising bread, the soft crackle of an old radio playing tunes from Agnes's youth. Weeks had turned into months since she dragged him in from the rain-soaked park. In the little shop, once a faded husk with cobwebs in the corners and a flickering bulb above the door was coming alive. Agnes bustled nearby, her gray hair escaping its bun as she swirled icing onto a batch of cupcakes, her voice breaking the quiet. "This place needs us, Evan. We'll make it sing again." He looked up, flour dusting his arms, and felt a flicker of something new, a reason to keep going. They began with sweat and stubborn hope. Evan sanded the splintered countertops until they shone, his hands trembling at first, but growing steadier with each stroke. Agnes climbed a rickety ladder to paint the walls a soft yellow, her nurse's precision keeping the lines crisp, her laughter echoing when she smudged her cheek. They hauled out rusty pans, polished the oven until it reflected their faces, swapped wobbly stools for sturdy ones, scavenged from a thrift store down the road. Evan strung up red-checkered curtains, their edges frayed but cheerful, and one night over a pot of tea and a plate of biscuits, he ventured a thought. "What if we call it Second Chance's Bakery? It's what we are." Agnes's eyes twinkled, her nod quick. "More than us, kid. It's for anyone who needs it." They carved the name onto a plank, painted it blue, and hung it proud above the door. The town noticed. Second Chance's Bakery opened its arms, and people poured in, drawn by the scent of fresh loaves and the promise of a seat. Old Mrs. Carter, a widow with a cane and a shaky smile, parked herself daily with a coffee and a Danish. telling stories of her late husband. A trio of teens, one with a rainbow patch sewn onto her jacket, claimed a table by the window, their laughter spilling out as they split a cinnamon roll 3 ways. Evan watched them, his throat tight. Kids like him, maybe hiding from parents who'd rather judge than love, now safe in this space. He and Agnes baked late into the night, pulling trays of muffins, twisting dough into knots, filling the air with sweetness. The register rang louder each week, but it wasn't the cash that fueled Evan, it was the connection, the way people lingered, the way they belonged. They dreamed bigger. Evan, his old teacher's instinct kicking in, pitched an idea over breakfast, his voice firm. "Let's teach baking, free for anyone who wants it." Agnes grinned, digging out a stack of recipe cards yellowed with age. "You're on, kid." Saturdays turned into chaos and joy, kids with flour-streaked faces giggling as they punched dough, retirees swapping tales while shaping cookies into clumsy stars. A local reporter showed up, camera in tow, filming Evan kneading a rye loaf while Agnes showed a boy how to glaze a bun. The story aired on the evening news, dubbing Second Chances the bakery that heals. And the next day, a line snaked down the block, folks clutching crumpled bills and shy smiles. "Never had a place like this," one said, pressing Evan's hand. "Feels like family." Evan blossomed. His hands, once locked stiff by pain, now moved with a baker's grace, crafting rolls and tarts like he'd been born to it. Agnes watched, her pride a quiet thing, slipping him extra slices of pound cake when she thought he wasn't looking. "You're a natural," she said one afternoon, the shop buzzing with chatter. "Not just at this, at bringing folks together." He wiped sweat from his brow, a grin breaking free, the weight of a decade's rejection lifting. His mother had called him worthless, but here he was weaving a tapestry of faces. Mr. Jenkins, the teens, the Saturday bakers. They called Agnes Graham now and Evan their uncle, titles that clung like warm dough, soft and real. Second Chances became the town's pulse. A corkboard sprouted by the register, bristling with notes. A job listing, a thank you scrawled in crayon, a sketch of the shop from a kid's hand. Evan nailed a rainbow flag to the wall, its colors bright against the wood, a silent stand for who he was, and the town embraced it. The bakery wasn't just a business, it was a refuge, for the old man with no one, the girl afraid to go home, the stranger needing a kind word. One evening as they locked up, Agnes rested a hand on his shoulder, her voice low. "We built this, Evan. You and me from scratch." He met her gaze, this woman who'd given him more than shelter, and knew he'd found home. Not in the house that cast him out, but in this flower-dusted haven where he finally belonged. Evan wiped down the counter at Second Chances Bakery, the morning sun spilling through the gingham curtains, casting golden patches on the flower-dusted floor. At 32, he'd turned this once dilapidated shop into a thriving pulse of the small Iowa town. Its wooden tables, crowded with regulars, sipping coffee, its air rich with the aroma of fresh sourdough and vanilla glaze. The breakfast rush had dwindled to a hum of quiet chatter, the clink of cups blending with the soft whir of the oven when the bell above the door chimed. Evan glanced up, expecting old Mr. Jenkins or one of the teens, but his hands froze mid-wipe. Linda, his mother, stood framed in the doorway, her coat tattered at the hems, her face drawn tight with fatigue, her eyes scanning the bustling room like a stranger lost in a crowd. She shuffled to the counter, her boots scuffing the worn linoleum, her voice cutting low and urgent through the bakery's warmth. "Evan, I need to talk to you now." He set the rag down, his pulse quickening, the murmur of customers fading as his pass crashed in. Agnes emerged from the back, her apron speckled with powdered sugar, her gray bun pulled tight, her sharp eyes narrowing at the woman before them. Linda ignored her, leaning over the counter, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Carl got laid off from the factory last month. The kids, they're sick, coughing all night, fevers spiking, and the bills are stacking up. We're flat broke, Evan. I heard about this place. Saw you on the news, how you're making money. I'm your mother, you've got to help your family." Her tone held no trace of warmth, only a brittle demand, as if the decade apart was a footnote she could erase. Evan's stomach knotted, the memory of that rainy night surging back. her door slamming, her voice branding him a disgrace, her rejection twice delivered with the same cold steel. He studied her, older now, her hair thinning, her shoulders stooped, but the hardness in her jaw unchanged. "Help my family?" he said, his voice steady, deliberate, loud enough for the room to hush. "You kicked me out 10 years ago for being gay, called me trash. Then again, sick and homeless, begging for a night on your couch. You said I wasn't your son." Linda's eyes darted away, then back, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That was the past," she snapped, her fingers gripping her purse. "Things are bad now. Carl can't work. The kids need medicine. Blood ties mean something when times get hard." Evan's mind flashed to Carl's mocking laugh, the stepkid's sneers, and he felt no tug, just a scar where connection once lived. Agnes stepped beside him, her small frame taut with fury, her voice slicing through the tension. "Blood ties? You left him in the rain, turned him away when he was down to nothing, all because he's who he is. I gave him a chair, a blanket, a chance when you wouldn't spare a glance. Don't you come in here claiming what you threw out." Linda spun to face her, cheeks flushing red, her voice rising. "Who are you to judge me? I carried him, raised him. I'm his real mother." Agnes stood taller, her eyes blazing with a fire Evan hadn't seen. "Raised him? I've been here every day, baking with him, building this place from the ground up. You don't get to call him yours just because you're desperate." The bakery fell silent, customers craning their necks, the air crackling with the clash of two women, one who'd birthed him, one who'd saved him. Evan planted his feet, caught between them, his heart thumping, but his resolve unshaken. He wasn't the trembling boy she'd cast out, not anymore. He met Linda's gaze, her desperation stark, her pride fraying at the edges. "You're not here to say sorry," he said, his words slow, measured. "You're here because Carl's broke, the kids are sick, and you saw me on TV, didn't you? You think I owe you because you gave me life." Linda's jaw worked, her hands twisting her coat, her voice dropping. "We're family, Evan. That's all I've got left to say." He shook his head, stepping forward, his shadow falling over her. "Family doesn't lock you out. Agnes gave me more in weeks than you did in years. She's my family now." He paused, the weight of her stare heavy, but he held it, unflinching. "I'll help," he said, and Linda's eyes lit with relief, too eager, too fast. "Not because you're my mother," he continued, his voice a quiet thunder, "but because I believe in kindness, even when you didn't show it. Food, medicine for the kids, I'll send what they need, but this bakery, this life, you don't touch it." Linda's face stiffened, a glint of the old disdain flickering, but she nodded, her shoulders slumping. Agnes rested a hand on Evan's back, her touch solid, grounding, and he felt the difference. He stood tall now, a man shaped by choice, not chains. Linda turned, her steps dragging as she left, the bell jingling behind her, and Evan watched her fade, no longer hers, but wholly his own. Evan stacked a tray of warm rolls in the back of Second Chance's bakery, the kitchen alive with the clatter of pans and the sweet tang of rising dough. At 32, he'd turned a crumbling shop into a sanctuary, its walls steeped in the laughter of a town that claimed it as home. Days had passed since Linda, his mother, walked out, her plea for help still echoing in the quiet moments. He'd promised aid, not out of duty, but out of a belief she'd never shown him. No one should go hungry, not even those who'd starved him of love. Agnes bustled nearby, her gray bun bobbing as she glazed a batch of donuts, her voice gruff with pride. "You did good, Evan, standing up like that." He nodded, a small smile tugging his lips, knowing he'd chosen mercy over the bitterness she'd sown. He kept his word. Twice a week, he packed boxes, bread, muffins, jars of soup, even cough syrup and bandages from the corner store, sending them to Linda's house through a delivery boy who didn't ask questions. Carl, her husband, was still jobless. The kids still sick, their lives a tangle of need Evan could have ignored. But he didn't. "It's not for her," he told Agnes one evening, sealing a carton with tape. "It's for me, for what this place stands for." She squeezed his shoulder, her calloused hands steady, and said, "That's why it's called Second Chances, kid. Not just for us, He felt it then, a peace settling deep. He wasn't feeding her family to win her back, but to prove he'd grown beyond her reach. The bakery thrived, its heartbeat pulsing stronger. Second Chances became more than a shop. It was a pillar, a refuge for the widow down the street, a classroom for kids with flour-dusted cheeks, a haven for teens who'd been told they didn't fit. Evan hung more drawings on the walls, sketches from Saturday classes, and the rainbow flag stayed bold by the window, a quiet beacon. The town leaned in, a farmer dropped off free apples for buys, a seamstress stitched aprons for the staff, a local band played acoustic sets on weekends. Evan moved with purpose now, his arthritis a faint ache he brushed aside, his hands shaping loaves with a baker's ease, his voice greeting every face that walked through the door. One crisp fall day, he stood on a makeshift stage at the town festival, the crowd spilling across the square, their breath fogging in the cool air. The mayor had handed him a mic, asking him to speak, and Evan looked out, seeing Agnes in the front row, her grin wide, the teens waving from the back. "I was 22 when my mom kicked me out for being gay," he began, his voice steady, carrying over the murmur. 10 years later, I came back broken, and she shut the door again. But I didn't just survive, I built this. He gestured to the bakery's booth, its tables piled with pastries. Second Chances isn't about where I came from. It's about who stayed. It's for all of us, anyone who's been told they don't belong. Here you do. The crowd roared, clapping until their hands stung, and Evan stepped down, his chest full, not with vengeance, but with something sweeter, belonging. Nights grew longer, the air sharp with autumn, and Evan sat with Agnes in the empty shop, a pot of tea steaming between them. The forest porch flickered in his mind, Linda's slap of words, the rain that once drowned him. But it was distant now, a shadow he'd outgrown. He'd fed her family, not because they deserved it, but because he'd learned from Agnes what she never taught. Love isn't blood, it's choice. "You're my mom," he said, meeting her eyes, and she chuckled, patting his hand. "Took you long enough to say it, kid." He laughed, the sound free, and knew he'd won, not by tearing down, but by building up. Second Chances was his home, his family, a life chosen, not given, and that was enough. Who's been your family when blood turned away? Share below, we want to hear. If Evan's story stirred your soul, please like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Heart Stories. Stay with us. Let's keep these tales of heart alive together.